In this video, I'm going to cover a comprehensive method of strengthening the shoulders. Now, this method can be used to rehab a shoulder after an injury to make it stronger. It can be used to prevent injuries, so prehab. It can also be used when you're starting out to give yourself an awesome foundation for strength training. It's important to prevent injuries in the upper body by making your shoulders very strong, and also training the exercises that are going to give them stability, mobility, and strength. If you just focus on the strength part, then you can get quite strong, but if you lose that mobility, that range of motion, that can limit your ability and also leave you prone to injury. And the same goes for stability. So if the joint's not optimally stable, then that strength is limited and the capacity is limited. If you have significant pain in your shoulders, then it's important to get that checked out. Sometimes you might have a full tear, or you might have a condition that will be exacerbated by some of these exercises. In saying that, you should never do any movement that is causing pain. Sometimes you might have mild discomfort, and then by getting that movement stronger, that will get rid of the pain. But you really want to be self-aware and conscious of that and own it. And part of that ownership is to figure out exactly what's wrong. In saying that, all these exercises have helped thousands of people that I've worked with, and it's a matter of understanding the mechanics of them and using them intelligently. All of them can be harmful if you overdo it, and if you don't do them enough or you don't get the right stimulus from it, it's not really going to do much. I've had a shoulder niggle for about a year now in my left AC joint. So I was doing some heavy dips, weighted bring dips, and I just remember after the workout just feeling a bit sore there. It didn't stop me from training, and I kept training, and then it kind of progressively got worse rather than getting better. So in that instance, I'd say that I've just done a partial tear and it didn't fully recover, and each kind of workout after that wasn't allowing it to recover. So it's important to listen to your body. Sometimes you have a program and you just want to stick to it, or you're making good progress, so you really get into your training, so you just keep pushing through. And I know when I was younger, a lot of the times I'd have a little niggle, I'd just train, get through it, and then the pain would just fade away. And one thing I have noticed as I've gotten older is the little niggles I really have to pay attention to as early warning signs to change my training, to do the slower tempo stuff, high volume stuff, and get a lot of blood flow into the area, and really respect my body and nurture it so that it can get stronger. But you learn these things as you get older, and you definitely learn a lot from injuries. So they do help you train more effectively and more intelligently. Once you have an injury and even when you've done the recovery in terms of just some time out, it's so important to just take your time and build your body up in a strong way. If you rush that process, your desire to regain previous ability, then you can limit your recovery and then also make the whole process take longer. So a lot of the times, slow, consistent work is so much faster, or most of the time, if not all the time. So take your time, listen to your body when you're doing these exercises, and remember that every exercise is a 72-hour event. And what I mean is that if you do an exercise, you don't want to just think about, well, how did I feel the next day? You want to think, how did I feel for the next 72 hours? Because that's usually the timeline for full recovery, unless the stimulus is so light that it didn't really create any tissue change. And in that case, you're just kind of moving, but you're not conditioning. But when you're conditioning your body, you do have a period in which you have to allow for your body to recover. Some things you get stronger at, and you can use them as a warm-up every day. And this is the saying, my warm-up is so-and-so's workout. When you get very strong, like if you look at a gymnast warm-up, that's like a heavy, hardcore workout. But because their conditioning level is so high, their threshold is so high, that's just warming their body up, and it's not until they do something really extreme that they're actually conditioning their body. And that's the whole point of training, is to keep bringing your body up to a higher level of conditioning. But sometimes when people focus on particular movements, they leave a gap and they don't fully cover all the different angles and tissue responses to give that solid foundation. And these movements in this video are going to try and help you cover those bases, so that way your body is more protected and stronger in a balanced way. A simple thing you can do every time you train is a self-assessment. So I start out my self-assessment with the shoulder band warm-up. In this warm-up, I'm doing these little circles. So I've got the band attached behind me, and I'm doing little circles coming up overhead. And these little movements in the shoulder, what they allow for is this 360 joint response. And then if I'm kind of sore in a region, so when I had the shoulder pain overhead was quite uncomfortable and to about kind of 10 degrees, that kind of range up there. So I just worked the range around that and just focused on that in my training, and I didn't really force that range of motion. Then the next one is a straight arm pull. So going into this kind of back lever position where the scapulas retract and then they protract when they come forward around the rib cage. And then moving on to a 45-degree horizontal, 45 up. And then if overhead was uncomfortable, then you would not do that position. I found that when the band was behind me, overhead was fine because it was being supported by the band, and that was pulling me into a stretch, whereas if I'm doing it as a pulling movement overhead, way heavier. So another position as well is doing the internal external rotation. So internal from the top down over the bicep. So that one there is going to get those internal rotators in the shoulder. Now if you've got any rotator cuff tears, that's going to be pretty awful and not going to feel good. You can make it easier by doing internal external rotation with the band with the elbows tucked in by the side to start with, and that's also a good test. So if that was uncomfortable, then you've got external rotation where the band is underneath the bicep and you're externally rotating, stretching internal rotation as you go down, working external rotation when you come up. And that's fairly comprehensive in terms of a pushing pattern. Then when you're coming around the other side, you're doing them all as a pull, and these are a lot harder. Most people aren't as strong, plus you're having to work harder, whereas in the other one, when you're pushing it, it's going into a stretch. Here you're going into that loaded overhead shoulder flexion position, which is probably one of the weaker positions for most people, and that's why press to handstands are quite hard for a lot of people, pressing up into that overhead position with flexion. Then you've got the pulls going on the straight, 45, straight out to the side, inverted reverse cross, and then from there going into that 45 degrees overhead and straight overhead. So those are quite challenging on the traps and hitting all those different lines on the traps. Then you've got external rotation, internal rotation. So that's that pull pattern version of those, and they're quite heavy, but again, if they were uncomfortable in a particular range, you'd limit the range. But if you've got full range there and they're feeling good, you can do more volume there to make them stronger. After going through that band warm-up, you can tell whether you've got some limitations, some pain in some different regions. Now, your workouts and your training, what you're doing should be reducing pain, not increasing it. So it's a really important factor in conditioning the body, is that you're trying to get stronger and healthier. And the range of motion should be improving, not reducing. If your range of motion is getting more restricted, then your body's tightening up too much from the workout. It's too much stimulus and your body's trying to protect itself. Part of healing the body is normalizing range of motion. So your pull and push pattern should be equally balanced. So you should have a nice overhead position when you're pulling from overhead, and you should have that range in that overhead position at the dead hang at the bottom of the pull-up, so that you can press up into that. Now when you have a shoulder injury, sometimes you can't go into a full dead hang, so you have to work an angle like on a 45 and gradually work back to that. Same as instead of doing a strict overhead press, you might do an incline press or just stick to horizontal pushing while that's getting better, and just stretch out that overhead position. Usually I find if people have pain in overhead pressing, they can do pull-ups first, so you're pulling from overhead before you can press. So they're usually doing that while they're still doing horizontal pushing, but then they're doing light movements overhead to gradually integrate that position into their training. So they may load up horizontal and then gradually build that overhead pressing action once it's healed. The other component that you need to look at is the stability of the shoulder blade. Now you've got the different positions, so you've got elevation, you've got depression when it's going down, protraction, retraction, and in the shoulders you've got internal rotation, internal, external rotation. So when those palms are facing forward, external, and then when the palms are facing back, internal. And those positions are really important to understand, because so much of how optimal shoulder mechanics depends on understanding that you are moving them smoothly. But the basic concept of balancing the shoulder is that you should have what's called spino-scapo-glenohumeral rhythm. So that's the spine, scapula, the glenohumeral joint, that's the humerus. So they should move smoothly together in the different positions that you use when you're training. And if they're not moving smoothly, so you've got this kind of fixated scapula, then it's usually protecting something, or the body just is trying to work around a painful area. So sometimes you might be able to reduce the range, get strong there, and then it has that carryover into the weaker range, or you just have to do an easier version that you can perform it without discomfort, so that way you can build that up. Usually the best way to build up is slower reps, higher volume, more blood flow to the area, not too much intensity, and gradually over time as you build that foundation, increase intensity. Something that's often overlooked is coordination after an injury. If you injure yourself, then sometimes the body doesn't understand positional awareness anymore because of that injury, because you've maybe spent 3 months or something avoiding a particular range, so your body doesn't know that the arm is in that position. So some simple drills you can do at home is, you can close your eyes, like look at a spot on the wall, close your eyes, and then while your eyes are still closed, point to that spot and then see whether the finger went straight to there. And that way you can get back that awareness and that control. So you look at a spot and then close and then point. Did the shoulder, did the hand respond? So can you feel where your shoulder is, where your arm is in space? Another great exercise is the body blade. So it's similar to doing the band exercises with the little circles, but you're oscillating the body blade. So you're moving it forward and back, so it's working both sides in the joint. I like the crossbody pattern because usually that feels pretty good when you have, compared to pressing straight overhead, especially in my case where I had an AC joint problem, that was still fairly good. Even when it was quite painful, I could still do that. Or you just limit the range so you don't go as high and you just work wherever it feels good. If it's that bad, you could actually use the other hand to spot it. So you're doing a double-handed one and then you're getting that carryover. But it is also important to work both sides. Even when if you've got an injured side, it's important to keep working both in a balanced way, because sometimes the side that's fine will help coordinate the other side. If you think of shoulder strength, it's all dependent on the neck. So let's have a look at the neck. We'll come in. So you can see you've got 7 cervical vertebrae. You've got the atlas, axis, and then C3, C4, C5, C6, C7, and that sits on the thoracic spine, which has 12 vertebrae. Thoracic spine has the ribs. Then you've got the sternum, the top of the sternum, manubrium, main body. Then you've got the clavicle, and then you've got the scapula here, you've got the coracoprocess here in the front. Then we've got the humerus, and you've got the glenohumeral joint, head of the humerus there. Now, what's quite amazing is once you start to layer in the muscle tissues. So intercostal muscles to stabilize the ribs and for respiration. You've got these deeper muscles here, so scalenes. You've got all the erector muscles here to stabilize the neck. Here you've got external rotation from the supraspinatus, infraspinatus, and then teres minor muscle. Then we've got internal rotation from the subscapularis, and then also teres major. Even though it's at the back, you can see that it wraps around to the front. And then we've got coracobrachialis, and you've got pectoralis minor there. You can see it's attached to the coracoprocess there. You've got biceps brachii, short head, long head. This is an important muscle here, serratus anterior. So if I fade the others, you can see how big that muscle is, and it's attaching to the rib cage. Now, an important thing to understand is that there is no bony attachment other than at the manubrium of the sternum or the sternoclavicular joint. So that the shoulder is completely dependent on all these muscles to stabilize and fixate the scapula against the rib cage. So rhomboid minor, major, and then to the top 4 cervical vertebrae, the levator scapula there. And you can see sternocleidomastoid, and that's attaching the skull to the sternum there, very cool, and the clavicle. An integrated system. When you come around the back, you can see the lat, You see this cross sling, which is really important, the opposite glute lat, and then in the front, the cross sling is going to be serratus anterior, external obliques, across to the adductors on the other side. Really cool, and all these layers on the abdominal wall that help stabilize. Now, if we just take all the tissues off, and then we have a closer look in here, and we can see these connective tissue, and then also the nerves that are feeding out through there. So it's quite an intricate system, but when you come in, you can see that that's the only thing connecting you. So that sternoclavicular ligament, and a lot of people that wears out from overloading that and not keeping the muscles taking the load, and then loading too much through the joint. First rib there, and you can see those nerves over the top of the first rib that can get entrapped and then cause all types of problems down the arm. Coming into the shoulder joint here, got a acromioclavicular ligament, trapezoid ligament, so all of these can get sprains and get micro tears in them and then get inflamed. Coracoacromial ligament here, and then you've got subcutaneous acromial bursa sitting on top, and then a subacromial bursa, and you've got the ligaments, glenohumeral ligaments wrapping around there, another bursa here. All these tissues can get inflamed and damaged, and they are susceptible when there's too much force going into the joint and the muscles can't dissipate it out. That's why it's so important to keep the load in the muscles and protect the connective tissue that's there to help you and stabilize, but not so much as the muscles. That's why lifting too heavy, moving too quickly if the tissues can't handle it, getting too fatigued, these are all the enemies of the joints when you go past the capacity of the muscle. That's why you want to always feel your body, work with your body, and not overdo it when you're training. Another favorite exercise of mine is the dislocates. So you can use a really wide grip when you're starting out, so that way it's quite easy to go around. And what you want to focus on is feeling that depression of the scapula, protraction of the scapula when you reach forward, elevation of the scapula when you come up, and retraction when you come down, and depression behind you. And move smoothly. It should be a smooth, comfortable movement. If you are overdoing it and you're trying to hold it too close too soon, you're going to force that mobility in the shoulder and aggravate tissues. So you want to gradually increase the intensity of the exercise by moving the hands closer. You can also add weight to it, but I would caution people to not add too much weight. It's very heavy, and then the closer you get the hands, and obviously that lever's longer, and the mobility challenge is up much higher as well. So you don't need to rush it, but you want it to feel good. Scap pulls are great, getting that control over the shoulder blade. So you can start out with them horizontal, and you can use cables or a band. You don't have to use the rings. I like the rings with body weight, but it's good to do both. But here I'm starting out horizontal and then gradually working overhead. Now you'll limit the range if you're uncomfortable in the overhead position because of the shoulder or whatever range is sore, and you can make it a lot easier by putting more weight into the feet as well. But this is a great way to get blood flow, control, activation of those tissues, and good tissue tolerance. So you're doing those longer sets, like up to a minute, 15 reps, and this will help strengthen and stabilize the shoulder. Now the reverse of that is going to be the scap pushes. So you're starting horizontal, walking the feet in, and gradually working up overhead into that elevated scapular position. The other thing with it is you want to focus on external rotation of the joint. So you want to focus on turning out as you're doing it, and that will keep the shoulder in a stronger position. Internal rotation is going to collapse and put more pressure into the joint. And you want to feel those serratus anterior, those muscles pulling the scapula around the rib cage when you're doing the pressing action, and they stretch as you go back. Just like in a reverse, you want to feel the traps working on all those different angles. The ring pulls are great as well, so you can get that integrated pulling pattern. Now it is important to do a load that you feel that you're getting that nice smooth movement and integration of the shoulder blade with the arm. If it's too heavy or if it's too hard, make it easy enough that you can do that. You can do it with a light band to start with. Otherwise you can do the ring pull, and you can see here where I'm going into that nice dead overhang position and then going into a horizontal pull. And that's a great way to begin the process of going back to pull-ups if that overhead position is sore, if you're just pulling straight up. So you're initiating that in a more comfortable horizontal position. The reverse can be done as well with a push up into a down dog, where you're getting that horizontal push and then going into that overhead position to where it's comfortable. Band pulls are great. I like single arm pulls because you can really feel the integration. So it's good to start out just using the upper body, stabilizing the rib cage. Then you can integrate that rotation with the opposite arm. And you want to think of having that staggered stance, so you're getting that cross sling. So if you're in a split stance, the front leg is in that lunge position, a high lunge, and you can use the lunge and integrate it into it, but you want to feel that cross body sling working, so the opposite glute and lat, and strengthening that, and that's going to help stabilize the whole shoulder girdle and a movement pattern for life. So for running, sprinting, and just how the body works with the cross pattern. The same is for the push, so you can start out with it nice and simple and just focus on using the arm. You want to push out of that back foot. Now you can do that in a high lunge position or a close stance, and then gradually open that out and integrate that into a lunge. But you want to feel that shoulder blade move around the rib cage. So rebuilding overhead pulls is really important. So doing the ring version that I showed before, but then also when you're going into pull-ups, you want to make sure that they feel good, that it feels nice and solid. You can use really high reps, feet on the ground, or you can use a band. A lot of people don't like bands, but if you use them effectively as a tool, they're great to build you up to being able to do full body weight. The overhead position for the press, really important to progress it slowly and make sure that if you do have a painful range, to just move slowly across that. You may limit it and just do partial range and light weights, and then gradually work that full range as it's pain-free and you're recovering really well and you're getting stronger. Trap shrugs are great, really simple. So if you're just getting nice, simple elevation of the scapula and letting it depress, getting stronger through there offers a great foundation, provided you're maintaining good neck stability. Now, before you go back into dips, a lot of the times dips put a lot of pressure on the shoulder. So usually what I recommend people do is get really strong in push-ups, but then they also get strong in dip shrugs. So they've got a good foundation for the scapula, so that's nice and stable, so you're not collapsing when you're going down into the dip. If you've got that foundation, then that way you can allow for more load to go in the shoulder before the scapula is going to be uncontrollable. So you want to have good control of the scapula, and then that way you can lean into that dip and use the arms, use the anterior deltoid, the tricep, the chest, the movement muscles with the stable scapula. So horizontal pulling with a bent row, great. Doing two arms at once saves you time. Plus it's going to give you that postural endurance in the lower back and the whole spine when you're in that bent over position. So when you're doing, you really want to feel the back working in a nice strong way, the whole back, and really getting full range of motion. Again, if it's uncomfortable at any point in the range of motion, just work around that or gradually build it up. Push-ups are an awesome exercise, very simple, very effective. You want to have that nice stable scapula, so doing those scap shrugs as a foundation first are great, and then going into progressive sets, so having your hands elevated up on a bench so it's quite light, then going to the knees, then going to the toes, so that way you can gradually increase that tissue tolerance. I usually use with people and myself, if I've got an injury, 12 to 15 reps, so that way I know I'm hitting enough volume, and I'll use a timer. Most of the times I'm going to be doing around 30 to 60 seconds time at attention. Bicep tricep work, really important, so you want to strengthen the connective tissue and the forearms with that work as well, and it just allows you to isolate the chain. Sometimes you can't do the shoulder movement, but the bicep and the tricep in an isolated way is still very strong. So maintaining that while your shoulder's recovering, really important, and then also strengthening it in the long position, so when you're stretched out, so the end range, and then in a short position, and then just doing just your kind of usual bicep curl with weights as well. The bands are great, so you can hit really high reps with those and get that volume in there. Now when you're doing the tricep version, you can do the stretched end range version with the band behind you, or you can pull the band towards you to get that short range version. And I also like laying on the back and just doing your basic skull crusher. You can take that into an overhead stretch position But again, you've got to respect the shoulders and work with where they're at, maintaining good form, making sure there's no pain, and just keeping those triceps strong, keeping the tendons really healthy, and allowing your body to go back into a more integrated pulling and push workout without having to isolate. But in saying that, just doing those isolated exercises as well, even when you're healthy, will make the whole chain stronger. Whenever you get an injury, it's always a great time to work around it. So whether you're training your legs, your quads, hamstrings, squats, lunges, bends, your core, and then also the forearms. Great time to get strong in those. The forearm drills I like are just with the dumbbells, just doing the empty can version. If you've got one shoulder that's really sore, you can spot it and just do one at a time. And then also internal external rotation for the forearms, and then just doing your extension, which if you do handstands, ring work, or a lot of pushing work with the hands where the forearms are connecting with the ground, you're going to find that the flexors are quite conditioned, the extensors are quite weak, so getting those stronger, and then also doing that lateral deviation as well, really important to maintain strength in the forearm. To program these exercises, I usually recommend people do them twice a week to fatigue. You can do them every day to just get blood flow and activation and get the nervous system primed. But in terms of conditioning them and getting that full response supercompensation 72 hours, I do my upper body work twice a week, Monday, Thursday. On a Saturday, I do gymnastic strength, and that's usually a bit lighter and it's not as intense because it's straight arm strength work. But you know, that's quite a lot. So for a lot of people, twice a week is more than enough for upper body work. In terms of which movements to do first, always do the most complicated movements first and then go to least complicated. When you're injured, things change a little bit because you've got to really warm up, you've got to feel the body, you've got to work around it, and you might be able to put more intensity into some movements. So they're the ones that you're probably going to put first. But then you've got to really concentrate a lot more because of the injury to work around it. So it's never that simple, but always, you know, your workout shouldn't be going longer than an hour. Usually strength training, I'll do about 45 minutes. So I can really focus and put good energy into it. You start to go too long, you get too fatigued, and the quality isn't as good. Thanks for watching. If you've got any questions, put it in the comments below. If you're looking for online coaching, I do proof of work coaching where you submit videos for feedback. And the program is designed around an assessment, which is filming yourself doing different movements, so that way we can balance your body. The program also includes lifestyle coaching, so you're looking at what you're eating, how you're hydrating, sleeping, and your recovery in between workouts, so that way you can get the best results. So keep having fun, enjoy this beautiful life. Ciao.